welcome to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. The doctor is in, the one and only Dr. Ray Guarendi. His new book, Living Calm, Mastering Anger and Frustration, proudly published by EWTN Publishing, available naturally through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com, all things Catholic. Speaking of great Catholics, we have our own Dr. Ray here. Great to see you from radio fame and TV fame and now even Bookmark fame.
Oh, the Bookmark has catapulted my career. That's what did it.
This is the beginning of the end.
You and I have been together so many times, it should be bookmarks.
That's right. It could be. In fact, most people have voted and say, why don't you let Dr. Ray do the show? He does a better job anyway. Let's speak about your latest book, Living Calm, Mastering Anger and Frustration. I thought it was interesting that in the acknowledgement, Cindy Kavner, the original editor, said, did you ever think about writing a book about anger? And you said, hopefully her request was based upon my clinical experience and not on a personality flaw. What do you think it was based on?
I didn't ask her. I was afraid to hear.
Mm-hmm. Is that an issue for you, frustration and anger
no,
as a general
only
thing?
in sports.
Mm-hmm.
Only in sports.
You're a softball maven,
and
right?
I learned to pull myself out of the situation. You know, as I get older, the near occasion of sin really influences my life.
It gets closer? It's nearer and nearer?
That's right. And I've noticed something. People will say, you know, I'm getting calmer as I get older. And I said, well, you're just getting older.
Right.
It takes too much energy to get mad.
But do you think there's a certain amount, I guess, calmness and wisdom comes together where people start to learn, you know what, don't sweat the small stuff. It really doesn't really going to matter that much, right?
They've done studies about that.
Right.
And what they've noticed is a personality characteristic as you get older, the old get off my lawn kids is kind of a, yeah, okay, it makes a nice curmudgeon-y story, but for the most part, you do settle down.
Right.
I think it's just because you lose your hormones, so you just kind of eventually just
Well,
taper
you shouldn't
off.
be playing softball on everybody's front lawn.
Hey,
That's what the problem was.
it takes two singles to score me from third.
Is that what it is? Right onto their stoop. Did they have stoops for you? Or I grew up that we had stoops. In the beginning of the chapter, you talk about, you know, the typical references those of us probably our age at least would have heard. Oh, he's got a short fuse. She's so emotional. He's got a hot temper. And now you say you don't hear those things anymore. Why?
We've psychologized anger.
Okay.
Anger management issues. How often have you heard that phrase, huh?
Absolutely. They provided the base to figure out exactly what was issue. Oops, I mean trouble. Why did you do that? Issue. Trouble.
Issue is a psychobabble word.
Okay.
He has issues. Now that's the generic issue. Mm-hmm. But you could say he has anxiety issues. He has sibling issues. I think he has marital issues. He has issues with his own anger management. So it makes it very psychological, and the more psychological it gets, the less personal responsibility it gets.
Well, you say here, fewer talks of tantrums or bad attitudes. Instead, clinical talk governs. He's an angry child. She has problems with impulse control. His moods look bipolar. Now, as somebody, and you talk about this new language that shuns value judgments, as a parent of a child who is autistic and was diagnosed that way, over the years, the number of people being diagnosed, I don't quite understand why it's so exploded. But some of it, I do think, sometimes falls into that category of kind of like, if I have a diagnosis, then they're not responsible, and the parent doesn't feel responsible because it's not a function of something I did or didn't do, it just is.
In medicine, diagnosis explains. You're diabetic. Well, what does that mean? It means that you're not producing enough insulin or you're not producing any insulin.
And you can test that.
We can contest that.
Right.
You have oppositional defiant disorder. Now, what is that? Well, that means you have anger or upset or break rules a little too often and a little too intensely. Well, why do I do that? Well, because you have oppositional defiant disorder. Well, how do you know I have opposition? Well, because you do that. Well, why do I do that? Because you have oppositional defiant. It's a circle.
Right, you go in.
It's just a description.
But it's supposed to be science, and you say it about the parsimony of science and the idea that seek the simplest explanation. And that used to seem like the way we did things in the past, but now it seems like we totally overly complicate things.
95% of the parents who walk in my office with a behavior problem kid, and I hesitate to use those words because it makes it sound like it's the kid's problem. 95% of the time, the parents could do many things differently to make this kid not be so much that way.
Even if he has some intrinsic things that are there, right?
Yes, of course. Okay. This kid could be tougher to raise. On a 1 to 10, he's an 8. All right, his sister's a 2, so you raise her and you think, well, I'm God's gift to parenthood. But he comes along and he's more normal, but you think he's strong-willed, you think he's got anger problems, but in fact, you just need to be a stronger parent.
Well, could it be that he's more normal for the way a guy tends to be growing up versus the way a girl might be growing up?
We used to think that, didn't
Right,
we?
right,
We used to recognize there were innate physiological differences that make guys a little more risk takers, a little more pushy, a little more trip switch.
More physical
yeah,
oriented. and
that's
stuff like that.
reality.
Right.
I don't know if you're allowed to say that anymore.
Right. Well, we just did. To better understand anger and its emotional buddies, the book will avoid ever-shifting newspeak. What are the emotional buddies that come along with anger?
Frustration, agitation, irritation, upset. Most people will say, and I think this is particularly true of the ladies, they don't necessarily have an anger problem. They have a frustration problem. It's a percolating low level of distress kind of thing, as opposed to guys who can go off.
Right. You talk about in a chapter, problem with disorder. Some of these newfound disorders, to some degree, can envelop many, if not most, people. And that's the thing. A lot of times you have these descriptions. It's kind of like when somebody's talking about reading their horoscope. A lot of these things, they can apply to everybody and his brother. You know, you can find yourself in there someplace.
One of the best studies I saw was called the Aunt Fanny study. They gave this supposedly new personality test to a group of sophomores. Sophomores are the rats of clinical psychologists in college. So they gave the test. They said, now you fill this out and we're going to come back with the results in 2 weeks. They came back and they gave each of the kids the results of the personality test. And they said, please rate how close we came to you. The kids, 80% of them. Oh, boy, you nailed me, right on target. You know the tricky thing those shrinks did? It was the same description for everybody.
Everybody, right, exactly.
It's the Aunt Fanny description.
Right, especially if you find positive things in there, then you're really going to find people who are going to connect to that as well. I thought this was interesting too. Who hasn't come across a magazine article? You know, I actually heard a line in a sitcom recently where somebody was doing something, and the grandmother said to her daughter, "What did you read, an article in a magazine or something? You know, what are you talking about?"
It's true.
Yeah,
I mean, we are so over-psychologized, and so much of that. People will say to me, well, how can I not respond in anger when my mother says that? And I'll say, well, don't respond in anger. Well, no, how? How can I not respond in anger? Well, don't respond in anger. And that sounds so psychologically foolish because we're a how-to culture. Tell me how to, don't do it. But there's got to be a technique. First of all, decide you're not going to say that to your mother. And that's part of what happens.
Right. You say in the section as well, a preoccupation with normal narrows the boundaries of what is defined as normal, leading more behaviors to be tagged as deviant. It strikes me in some ways that in modern culture we tend to take normal as meaning perfect. That somehow when we say there are no normal families, meaning there's no perfect families, the fact is everybody's got problems. That's normal, isn't it?
A parent will say to me, my daughter likes to play by herself. Is that normal? My son, he threw 3 temper fits last week. Is that typical? The is it normal question has replaced the is it right question.
Okay, I see.
And the culture's in trouble when that happens.
You say, when I attended college long ago, Freud was a freshman. When I was a senior, the emphasis was on all the way the environment shaped personality. So in such a short period of time, the whole perspective of this settled science changed.
Of course. I heard a great line. It was from Charles Krauthammer. He said, you want to know about science? Settled? He said, Einstein, beautiful theory of science. Settled. Then came quantum physics.
Right.
All of a sudden, the settled science in physics wasn't so settled.
Right. Exactly. You talk about the idea of the power of temperament. What do you mean by the power of temperament?
Everybody's wired different. We're all wired different. Some kids will make you feel like you're God's gift to parenthood, and other kids you start calling them Cujo. My aunt was 93 years old. I don't think I ever saw her get mad. Ever!
Is that the one you talk about in the book?
Yeah. Was it because she was such a holy sweetheart?
Including some guy who broke into her kitchen, right?
Into her
had
kitchen.
a story, right?
He was grabbing her purse, and he was going to walk out with it. She comes in. She's about 4'10", little Italian lady, 87 pounds. Hey, put that down, you dirty dog.
Right.
I don't know if it shook him up or what, but he dropped it and he took off. I never saw her get mad. Now, do you say, was she so incredibly psychologically well-adjusted? Maybe, but I don't think she had quite the fire in her temperament that some people do.
You talk about something called silent anger. What are you referring to?
That's the scary stuff. That's the one where you see the television cameras and they're panning the neighborhood, and the neighbor guy who was a banker, and they found out he torched 4 garages. He was such.
Didn't he bring food to the barbecue?
He brought
or something?
food to the barbecue. Such a good guy,
Right,
such a
right.
nice man.
Right.
You know, I guess you never know. That's what scares people, because when you have this eruption of
Well, that's
somebody.
random. People are
That's
afraid
what
of
it is. They're afraid of
randomness.
And they
right?
always say
Yeah.
things like, but that's not who he is. And I go, wait a minute, who else is it?
Right.
He may not be that way most of the time, but there are those spikes in his emotions.
In those kind of situations, whether it's crime or other, you tend to find that people try to figure out, how can I distance myself from that person's situation to protect myself?
As long as I'm not like that.
Right.
I got to be able to say, that's why the popularity of these afternoon TV shows.
Right.
Well,
yeah,
you
the
know,
Jerry
I
Springer,
may,
right.
but look at those people are nuts.
Right. I might be pretty bad off here.
But not like that.
Yeah.
I use you, by the way, as my comparison.
No.
Did you notice I do that? I'll say, yeah, my wife will say, Raymond. I say, hey, I'm not Doug.
Absolutely.
Boy, that's really gutsy talking about like that with your boss, you know?
You talk about when parent better disciplines, the anger usually fades, not only from sight, but only from the child's being. You're talking about a child and their temperament. So are you saying it's better to discipline to get rid of anger, or does disciplining cause anger?
Much of the time when a parent doesn't discipline well, he gets frustrated. He gets angry, he gets upset, so does the child. So then the parent says, well, he's an angry child. Well, no, if you're clashing with him because of your ineffective or erratic or inconsistent or emotionally laden anger, then yeah, he's going to look that way. But if you've disciplined better, there isn't anywhere near the anger, both for you and him.
Now, you also talk about here about the idea that anger is two-faced. What do you mean it's two-faced? Like the character from the comics
eruptive.
or something?
The eruptive stuff is what scares people. Somebody gets out of control. You just grab something, take this cup and throw it up against the wall. That's eruptive. But then the other kind of the anger is that percolating, simmering type of anger that people are scared of. Because when's he going to go off?
Right. He's going to blow, but we're not sure
He's going to blow, but I don't know when. I don't want to be near ground zero.
You talk about here that there are different places that promote different kinds of conduct. You say, how does one reconcile home child with school child, or marital partner with work partner? Simple, they don't need to be reconciled. It's all about being human, because you're talking about the idea the teacher says he's wonderful in school. You come home and say, where's that kid?
That's right.
You hear from the coworker, your
husband is
the nicest man
wonderful.
in
He's
the
the
world.
nicest
and you're going,
man.
oh,
You take out the wallet and say, is this the guy right here?
Right, you sure? Right.
Because people talk in traits, Doug. If I say, you know, Doug, he's kind of thoughtless. Well, where is he thoughtless? With whom? At work, with his son. You're very, very thoughtful with your son. Are you thoughtless with that person that you work with? So many of these traits are affected by the situation, the state that they're expressed in. For example, a kid may go through 12 years of school and never have a single fit, not one. He averages 9 a week at home.
Right.
Well, which is he? Is he an angry kid or is he a calm kid? Well, depends on the context.
Maybe he's blowing off steam at home.
Well, that's what
so
people.
he can act better at school.
That's what parents say. They go, "Do you suppose he holds it in all day, and then when he gets home, he has to explode?"
Yeah,
No, I know.
Oh,
I think
okay.
he knows where the speed limit's 20 and where it's the Autobahn.
In the section, Chapter 6, Close or Clash, it's the emotional law of proximity, and you talk about something, there's a series of laws you talk about. One of them's called, which I think is probably, at least I think it's listed here as number 1, and I would think it's the law of personalization.
Oh.
Why don't you explain that?
That will make you more angry at somebody than just about anything. Do you remember there was a very high profile case where a guy did this heinous crime, and there were people demonstrating outside the courtroom for mercy. He came out and he gave them a sign that was quite disrespectful to them. Oh, they got so upset. They got so angry at him. Well, wait a minute. They weren't that angry at him when he did what he did, but when he disrespected them, now that's a different ballgame. When I personalize something,
Right.
I'm prone to interpret it in terms of, you're doing this, you're making a comment on me here.
Right.
You're doing this to me. And motives are very hard to interpret. You know, I can see your behavior. Right. I can't see your motive.
Well, the thing I try to think about, I always try to say to somebody is realize most people are spending all their time thinking about themselves, not about you or anybody else.
That's exactly right.
And so if they happen to do that, they probably don't even know or were thinking about something else at the time.
You're walking down the hallway here,
Right.
and you say hi to somebody, and they just look straight ahead and ignore you.
Right.
Well, okay, maybe they're preoccupied, maybe they're hurting, maybe something's going on, but our first interpretation is, what's this?
Right, right.
You don't say hello, what am I? Am I not worthy of a hello?
Right.
This is what we do. I think it's a throwback to that protection of the self.
The other thing you talk about here, which I think is really important, is the law of expectations, that whole idea of managing expectations and the differences between what people expect the behavior to be and what the traditional behavior probably is naturally going to be, and getting upset between those two.
One of the best definitions of frustrations I ever heard. Frustration is the gap between the way we want things to be and the way they are. So if you want them to be here, you want your kids to act this way, you want your spouse to act this way, but here's how they're acting. Now you got two options. You can try to move them up to where your expectations are, which is really tough, or you can do this. You can bring your expectations down closer to reality.
Right.
The law of expectations also has a corollary. Doug, if I treat you good, I expect you to treat me good.
Right.
And our Lord would say, that's not the way you operate, Ray. You're treating someone else well is independent of how they treat you. But in the law of expectations...
Well, that's where being a true Christian is difficult for us average
I don't
type
use
people.
you as my measuring stick.
That's right. You say long married couples, when asked about the keys to their durability, routinely answer, we've learned to accept who the other is.
I will have people come in my office after 25 years of marriage, and they're still fighting over the same everyday thing. And I will say, how long have you been fighting over this? Well, I think the day after we got married. Can you accept that he doesn't call you sometimes, and you have supper waiting for him, and that's the way it is? I've told him, and you know what else? He doesn't care about me, because if he cared about me, he wouldn't do that. Right. Personalization mixed in with that, I got to accept certain realities here.
Right, good point. Right or wrong, in chapter 7, you said a former Christian evangelist asked, how do you connect with a generation that hears with its eyes and thinks with its feelings? What does that mean?
True. Because we, by and large, especially psychologists push this, we're emotionally driven. Doug, you can argue with the way I think. You can't argue with my emotions. Right. If I tell you, Doug, I feel bad about that, and you say, Ray, there's not a reason to feel bad.
Right. You shouldn't feel
Who
bad,
are you
Ray?
to tell me I can't feel bad?
Right.
So there's the difference. My emotions are protected. That's why when I was in psychology, that was the language we talked in.
Right. But isn't a lot of it, I mean, you can have kind of that, marriage and kind of used to talk about, feelings aren't right or wrong, those kind of things like that. But a lot of it, but the main thing was, it's what you do with that feeling. I mean, you might get upset over what somebody said to you, and you have that initial reaction. But the real question is, well, what do I do with this feeling now?
Those feelings are neither right or wrong. I hate that. You know why?
You do. That's why I brought it up.
Yes, because can you imagine our Lord saying, well, if you lust after someone, but you don't do anything about it, and then could you say to the Lord, Lord, my lust is neither right nor wrong because I didn't do anything about it?
Well, I think that the sense was many times people have an initial reaction or emotional reaction to something, which is almost like you say something
reflexive.
And I get upset. The question is, do I continue to get upset and pursue that upsetment, or do I step back and say, that's not really a problem?
That's a factor, but the other
it.
problem is we take a whole bunch of, let's say, for example, I say to my wife, honey, you just irritate me constantly. You just do. But I'll tell you, I don't act on it. Would she feel good about that? Would she say, well, it's good to know that I'm irritated?
I'm happy you're putting up with me.
Yes.
Right. No, I understand that.
That's an emotion that's ugly.
Well, let me ask you, Ray, is part of your problem you started off as an engineer, are you too logical to be a psychologist? Is that the problem?
I had trouble in grad school. I went through grad school like this half the time, going, you actually think that?
Mm-hmm. And so why is anger like a horse, and did you fall off it?
What's the average horse weigh? 800 pounds, 900 pounds? I mean, their strength is 10 times ours, right?
Right.
You get that little bit. You get that little bit in a horse's mouth, and you can guide him every which way. Anger's the same way. I can guide it by bridling my mouth one of the things I've noticed is pretty much all the damage I've done is with my mouth. I can't remember the last time I punched somebody. I think I was maybe 6 or something. Now, I threw a few elbows in basketball.
Right, but something where you really hit somebody in anger hoping to hurt them at the time.
The bridle in the mouth.
Now, at the end of each of your chapters here, you have something called turning the page. I want to ask you about that, but this one in the ally or adversary section, the saying is sometimes a vice is just a virtue carried to an extreme. Anger, too, can be a virtue if not taken to an extreme. Explain that, and also, what's the idea of turning the page put at the end of each chapter?
That was my semi-creative way of trying to segue into the next chapter.
Move chapter to
chapters. To give you some sense that there's an organization to the book. I find that anger, I use the example of lifting weights. When I get upset over a poor set, my next set is better. Why? Well, I'm angry. Now, I don't throw weights, I don't kick anything, I don't cuss. But it's a surge. It's an emotional surge. My friends used to laugh at me when I was halfway decent in softball, and they'd say, well, Ray just popped out. Next time up, he's going to crush it. Because I'm just like...
You're going to be so upset.
Yeah, it was that kind of directed anger. Our Lord did that in the temple. He's directed anger. There's a difference between righteous anger and right-filled anger. The right-filled anger is, I have a right to be upset because of what you did. Righteous anger is recognizing something wrong done to somebody else.
You talk about here in the section on Living Calm, page 52, a study compared how we see our foibles with how we see others. It found that we see our weaknesses as due more to specific circumstances while seeing others as part of their personality. In other words, we have excuses for why we're acting badly.
Before the show, the guy came over and fixed your hair, right?
Right.
Now, if I interpret that, I say, well, Doug's kind of he's a little bit slovenly sometimes. It's kind of his characteristic, he's slovenly. If they come in and fix my hair, I'm going to go, yeah, this morning I used a different shampoo, and I think that's what happened. Yeah, I interpret my foibles as context related. I interpret your foibles as personality related.
Right. Now, did you include a reference to Flip Wilson because you wanted to prove how old you were, or what? And the devil made you do that too?
Hey, I don't remember Flip. My grandmother told me about it.
Is that what it is? He told you about his TV show, and the devil made you do it?
Here's the example I use. Somebody says, when I get angry, that's it. I mean, that's it. I am not going to be able to control myself. I said, what if I said to you, you stop right now and I'll give you $1 million? Would you stop? Yes.
That's a lot of motivation.
How about 100,000? Yes. How about 10? You see, you can stop given the motive. It's really more of a I don't want to stop. I want to be angry at my wife and say these things because she deserves to hear them and I deserve to say them. Okay, so that motive of hurt is not enough to stop you.
Well, you need to either have a giant upside or a giant downside. And sometimes it seems like in society we've taken away the downside on certain of these things and wonder why people don't mind doing what they feel like doing. You talk about something, and I remember from the 70s, the whole assertiveness training movement. Everybody's got to be assertive and stuff like that. Is that passé now? We don't do that anymore?
We leave here, Doug, and I say, Doug, I just want to tell you, this has been bothering me through the whole interview, that you didn't really focus on the things that I wanted you to focus on, and I was a little upset at that. So I just want to let you know.
Well, isn't that gets you? You're not frustrated anymore. You get to say that. What about the whole cathartic?
Oh, that's been blown out of the psychological water.
Stuff. I know it has.
When you vent,
a big deal, right?
You know what? When you vent more.
Right.
It's as simple as that. If you can stifle yourself in the front of the vent, you are much less likely to vent in similar circumstances.
And here, as we said earlier in chapter 14, high or low, to reduce frustration, reduce the distance between what you expect from others from life and what is actually there.
People will say, but wait a minute. Don't we have to speak up with moral wrongs? I'm saying, yes, depending upon the situation context. However, much of our expectations have nothing to do with morals.
Right.
I want you to act a certain way, and you're not.
Right. Now, you talk about the F word here, but you mean a different F word.
Fair.
Fair.
Fair. We want life to be fair. It should be fair. And if it's not fair, I get upset. Why? Because it's not treating me with my due. I can just picture Jesus going, what makes you think?
What do you do?
Yeah, what is your due? What makes you think you have the right to that?
Well, I'd like to say, hopefully, we're not hoping for fair, we're hoping for good in this life, right? Exactly. So, what would be the major takeaway in our closing seconds here that you would want somebody to get from having perused this book?
Anger is not solely an emotion. It's a thought. And the better you get at understanding how you're thinking, how are you interpreting that situation? What are you saying about that person? Stop, slow down the thoughts. They fire through your head like reflexes. You're not even aware of them most of the time. Understand them, challenge them.
One last thing. Sometimes an apology meets with, if you were truly sorry, you'd stop acting that way, or sorry doesn't make everything right. I wish I could believe you. All reveal a fundamental misunderstanding about human nature. Also, just before we go, the idea of asking for forgiveness versus just being sorry.
I would not want the priest to say to me in confession, you know, Ray, you've been coming in here 25 years. And every time you say you're sorry, and every time you say, Father, forgive me. And you go out and do the same thing. Now, you know, Ray, if you were truly sorry, you wouldn't do it anymore. So I'm not going to give you absolution.
Right.
I don't want to hear that from a priest, but I'll do it for someone else. If they say, please forgive me, Ray. Well, you know, you got to show to me you're sorry.
Right.
And, you know, the way you've been acting the last 12 years, you say you're sorry, but then you go do it again. You must not be sorry. And I always tell people, if you're going to think like that, be careful, because you don't want the priest to say to you, you must not be sorry.
Well, you're going to be sorry, but you should pick up this book Dr. Ray Guarendi just
Always a pleasure,
put out
Doug.
through EWTN's publishing, entitled Living Calm, Mastering Anger and Frustration. We can all use it these days. Published by EWTN, available through our EWTN religious catalog, EWTNRC.com, all things Catholic. Thank you for joining us right here on EWTN's Bookmark, and look for Dr. Ray and his radio show and his television show right here on EWTN.